Thank you. So, just real quickly again, you can just put it on my desk. Thank you very much. So postmodernism is atheistic. There is no God. There is no purpose to life. There is no truth. No such thing as absolute truth. It is very experiential and it is amoral. That doesn't mean it's immoral. It means that there's no such thing as morals or absolute right and wrong. And it's very driven by culture. We'll see how our culture is driving this as we go through this. Yes? Experiential means that the way they used to say it back in my day is it feels good to do it. So it's experiential more than it is a set of beliefs.
Not sure how I feel about that.
Wait, no, we're not going to do that.
The Matrix.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
What?
There's no belief in a transcendent God. Postmodernism rejects any sort of meta-narrative. A meta-narrative is a story that tells a truth or a story that explains why we're here. And obviously they wouldn't want that, or they wouldn't believe in that, because there is no such thing as absolute truth. Remember one of the first days of school, gentlemen on the back? That I put that, that curve down, I put creation, fall, redemption. That is the Christian meta-narrative. That is the meta-narrative that explains how we got here and why the world is as it is. And there are other meta-narratives that other religions and other philosophies have, but postmodernism would say there is no such thing as a meta-narrative. Then the other thing that is very important to postmodernism is this idea of deconstruction. And deconstruction, simply put, is tearing down the conventional ways of doing things, or the conventional beliefs. If there is no absolutes, if there are no truths, if there is just your opinion and my opinion, or there's nothing that's ultimately right or ultimately wrong, then we have to tear down all of those sorts of ideas that we've built our culture on. Because if they don't exist, then they are meaningless. And so there's no grand narrative, and postmodernists are very skeptical and suspicious of any sort of ultimate truth. And so they try to deconstruct that. So here's what deconstruction means, and this is really at the heart of postmodernism. We're seeing it, and I'll talk about this more later, but seeing it also in the church. So it began as a philosophical movement, or a theory in literary criticism, but it questions the traditional assumptions about certainty or identity or truth. It's pushing back on what have been normative ideas and ways of doing things for generations. And it's bled into everything else. It's bled into movies and architecture and media and ethics, and certainly college campuses. If you go to a school that is not Christian, if you go to a secular school, you'll definitely see postmodernism. You'll definitely, the default position, when you gotta leave, you gotta leave. The default position of that university is going to be atheism. So, and it's even, as I said, bleeding into the church. So there are no moral absolutes. Each person decides for themselves what their standard is. And we've seen this deconstruction, even in, I'm not going to go into detail on this, but in our culture, this idea of gender has become very fluid, has it not? And in my generation, in my parents' generation, in my grandparents, you were a boy or you were a girl. Now, I'm not making any commentary on that, but that's deconstruction happening in our society. It's become a fluid thing, not a thing that's like it's either X and X Y, which was the thinking for generations. Deconstruction about what marriage looks like, what relationships look like. Absolute tolerance is a primary virtue unless you believe in a meta-narrative. They're not tolerant of that. But absolute tolerance of everything and everyone else is valued. And then they do believe also, I forgot to mention this to the last class, this idea of utilitarianism. Anybody know what utilitarianism is? It's doing what is best for the most people. So it isn't like, okay, we've got all these needs and we're going to meet everybody's needs. It's like, we're going to take the group and we're going to go, this will help the most people. And then some people will know. I'll give you a perfect example of utilitarianism. A number of years ago, they changed, it was under Obama's administration, they changed school lunches. And everybody got the same lunch. And what they did was they said, okay, here's the average portion. And so everybody gets this. But not realizing, and I remember, like, there were kids at Bellevue West when this first started that were, like, dealing candy out of their locker and snacks out of their locker because people ate lunch and they were still hungry. And so they were like, oh, maybe this for 50 cents. So they were making money off of this, right? And so they take the 250-pound offensive lineman and the 105-pound cheerleader, and they treat them as the same, even though they aren't the same. That sort of utilitarian thought is part of postmodernism as well. It does seek soul and spirit. It seeks spirituality, but not a God who created us and who loves us and to whom we are beholden. And it prefers the experiential over the rational, how it feels, what they want. If it feels good, if it makes sense to me, then that's right for me. Also, in my day, but in my generation and generations before me, there was none of this. Well, if it's true for you, then that's fine. Then it's true for you, but that's not true for me. And I'm not talking about it's true for Justin that he has blonde hair, and true for Addie that she has brown hair, so that's true for you. I mean, like, that's this. So if Jesus is good for you, that's great. That's good for you, but that's not my truth. We learned about truth last year that truth is true in all times and all places, right? And that even just the idea of what is truth has become up for grabs. What does truth actually mean? All of that comes from a postmodern way of looking at the world. Ultimately, postmodernism, strict postmodernism leads to a life without hope. And I've mentioned to you before that I heard years ago Brenna Council say that for those who live with hopelessness, consequences. And I think we see this in our culture, this hopelessness. People do things that they would not otherwise do. If they have hope. Hope gives us a reason to get up every day and a reason to live in a way that is glorifying to God because He is our hope. But if you don't have that hope, hopelessness leads to all kinds of bad things, like things we talked about the other day. There were no mass shootings when I was in school, but they've spiked tremendously in your generation. And this was not this sort of nihilism, meaning that everything is hopeless, nothing is meaningful. My generation, maybe not even so much my generation. My generation is kind of a bridge between kind of the traditional family prevailing and going to church and all that and your generation. But my parents' generation, the greatest generation, they're sometimes called the generation that came of age during World War II or around the time of World War II, they found meaning in getting a job and working hard and providing for your family and having a family and getting married and all of that was pretty accepted norm. And they found meaning in that, going to church, being a good person, all of those things. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they were all Christians. They weren't. But now that sort of idea of just living a normal life and finding someone to love and to marry and raise a family together and all of that, that is no longer that's not seen as a norm for many people, as a good thing for many people, and we see it in our culture's views on marriage and things like that. My parents, my grandparents had no need to tear down our society. They decided they wanted to build up people and our society. So I'm just going to give you a real quick background on postmodernism, and then we're going to look at a couple of things and see how it shows postmodernism. So the word was first used in the 1930s, but it was really mostly established in the 70s. We began to see it first in the universities, which is where pretty much every philosophy starts out, and we've seen it in we see it in movies, we see it in song, music, we see it in norms, as I said, and we've even seen it in architecture. As you'll see in a little bit here. I don't know that we'll get to it. But I'm going to show you these pictures, and I'm not going to do all of them because some of them I don't quite get. But nope. The Matrix. Who's seen The Matrix? Anyone seen The Matrix? Tell me about The Matrix. What do you see in The Matrix that is postmodern? There's nothing beyond us, right? So there's nothing to hope in outside of we are the only hope. What else? Is there some hopelessness in there? Some angst? Anything else? What do you see? What else do you see of postmodernism in the Matrix? Okay, go on to the next one then. The Simpsons. I never watched The Simpsons much, too much yelling. Um, but before The Simpsons, um, and when I was a child, uh, families that were portrayed on TV were portrayed as sort of typical families. They were generally kind to one another. They were generally there wasn't the constant yelling. That's the reason I can't watch things. And not this sort of chaotic home. I think of Brady Bunch, which was pretty scandalous in its day because it was a remarriage. He had three boys, she had three girls, and they became the Brady Bunch, right? And I was going to sing the song. And so you've got this man who it's stated that his wife died, but they never say what happened to the husband. There's one line early on that kind of hints that she was divorced. It was the first time on TV that they showed a remarriage of a divorcee, because before that time it would have been scandalous. And that's a lot of years ago now, mid 70s. But in terms of total time, it's not that much time. And so we've seen it's gotten worse since the Simpsons. The Simpsons is, of course. But this idea of nuclear family is not the norm that we once had. I really don't know anything about South Park. It's just things like that. So, do you know who this guy is? Anybody know? Candy, for who knows who this guy is? He's dead now. Dr. Kevorkian. Anybody know who Dr. Kevorkian is? He is the doctor that he was a proponent of physician-assisted suicide. So if you didn't want to live anymore, or if you were sick, or whatever it was, he would help you medicine. And it was illegal, and he got in trouble, and he went to jail. But because of him, a number of states, not a number of states, some states, including Seattle, where he was from, passed a law, and now physician-assisted suicide is legal in some states. Yes, I see the look on your face. That is postmodernism at work. There's no right, there's no wrong. And if you want to enter right, then we'll help you with that. That's the person that we can thank for bringing physician-assisted suicide into being. Anybody seen Pulp Fiction? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So what about like if you have like a terminal illness, something that's just like super painful and like the life is pain, there's no hope to get better. Like, is there personally do you believe there's any room for like? Is there any case where like a mercy killing is ethical?
I know Christians who are okay with that, and I don't think, at least in that sort of a case where there is, and I've sat by the bedsides of both of my parents when there was no hope of coming back. And I can understand why someone would want to do that, and I wouldn't call it sin if they chose that. The problem is that by that time, it's usually not the person you can measure, it's a member of the family. And so what is usually done when someone goes on hospice and they get to that point, they're put into a state of medication where they're not in pain, and they mostly don't know what's going on. Both of my parents woke up a couple of times. My mother woke up 3 times, 4 times to say I love you to her daughters. And growled out it. But they're not in pain and naturally. So I'm fine with that. I couldn't make a decision but I wouldn't say that there's some Christians that disagree. And I wouldn't ask for it myself. I want God to do. But I can see that as being fundamentally different than so Pulp Fiction. Anybody know anything about Pulp Fiction? So this is kind of the quintessential postmodern movie. The expected norm of a movie that's telling a story is that you begin at the beginning and you go through chronologically, and maybe there's some flashbacks, but generally it goes in chronological order. They made Pulp Fiction, and then they put all the scenes out of order. So something that happens in the middle happens at the beginning, and something that happens in the end happens in the middle, and it's all jumbled. And you have to try and figure out what's happening when it's not happening chronologically. That's postmodernism. We think this story is this. That's a story. But they took that and that convention and flipped it, didn't just flip it upside down, jumbled it all around the place. So that's Pulp Fiction. I do not recommend the movie. I have not seen the movie. I would not watch the movie, but it is definitely a very R-rated movie. So I'm not. I have no idea what they have against Starbucks. I don't know if it's has something to do with how we relate with one another. It used to be just I go to someone's house and sat down and chatted for a while, and that happened all the time. My mom's all the time. Things chat and play, whatever. And now we have to go to this special place to connect with someone. I don't know. Okay, this is what I wanted to show you, and we will pick up here tomorrow. But this is a museum on a college campus, and they intentionally wanted to build a building that seemed to defy all of the laws of physics, and it does look like it. It does look like it defies the laws of physics. But unfortunately for them, they had to use a lot of laws of physics to make it look like it defies the laws of physics. And I'll read to you about it tomorrow. And it has had a whole bunch of problems because they defy convention. The building has been fraught with problems. So we'll pick up there with that little bit of an article that talks about the Wexler Museum. That's it for today. And you can